Good morning, everyone. Welcome back to day 2 of our hearings. This is the Lessard-Sams Outdoor Heritage Council. It is September 2nd. We're into fall, it feels like. We've got a full agenda as we did yesterday. We have an agenda in front of you. Love to get a motion to approve the agenda. Tom has moved the agenda. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Any conflicts to report that were not reported yesterday? Additional conflicts? Not seeing any. My comments are brief today. I thought we had a great session yesterday. I appreciated everyone hanging around to talk about what we heard. At the end of the day, I thought it was very helpful to be able to do that. Appreciated it. We'll have format pretty much like we did yesterday. I'll try to keep us on track. We'll see how it goes. The rain is going to come later after we're gone, I'm told. We'll cross our fingers and hope the forecast is right. If anyone wants tomatillos or tomatoes, my garden is overflowing. I got 4 gallons of tomatoes, and I think I'm on my 7th dozen of tomatillos. I just can't eat that many, so please help yourselves, even in the audience. Go ahead. And those, I think, are all the comments that I have. Any comments from any member that feels like you forgot something? And all right. Mark, do you have anything you want to say before we get going?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, just a couple of notes of housekeeping for everybody. The restrooms for the presenters, if you haven't found them yet, are right over there. The other thing is, from a format for today, I think you're all aware, but we'll reiterate it. We have a anticipated 15-minute segment for each presentation, and that includes what we presume will be around 10 minutes of presentation and 5 minutes of Q&A. So when the presenters are 5 minutes in and 5 minutes left of your 10-minute presentation, I'll hold up the 5-minute sign. And when you have 2 minutes left, I'll put 2 minutes. And generally, I get them held up. Sometimes I miss it, but the 2-minute you usually get at least. And then we hope that you don't run over into the 5-minute of Q&A time. If you do, it just reduces that for you. But so please try to stick to that 10-minute time frame or less. Mr. Chair, one more thing. Those presenters, make sure that the chair will ask you, but please make sure that you state your name and where you're from when you're talking, just because we are strictly on audio. We will have a video recording of this as well, but with audio, that makes it that much more tough for people to know who's speaking. That's it, Mr. Chair.
With that, we'll just get going. Our first presentation of the day is FA01, Preventing Forest Fragmentation and Protecting Wildlife Habitat at the Edge of the Boundary Waters. Go ahead.
Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me? Is this
Yep.
Great, okay. Well, thank you so very much for having us here this morning. We are very excited to present our project to prevent forest fragmentation and protect wildlife habitat at the edge of the Boundary Waters Canoe Area Wilderness. I'm Chris Knopp, Executive Director of Friends of the Boundary Waters Wilderness, and I'm here with my colleague, Hudson Ledeen, our Community Coordinator in Ely. For over 45 years, Friends of the Boundary Waters Wilderness has been dedicated to protecting, preserving, and restoring the wilderness character of the Boundary Waters and the surrounding Greater Quetico Superior ecosystem. We're longtime conservationists, but first-time applicants here to the Lessard-Sams Outdoor Heritage Council. We've been involved in land conservation acquisitions since the 1980s, partnering with the Trust for Public Land and the Nature Conservancy. Today, our work has 3 pillars: wilderness, people, and community. For the wilderness, we support policies to protect forest land, wildlife habitat, and clean water resources. For people, through our No Boundaries to the Boundary Waters program, we connect diverse students across Minnesota to the Boundary Waters through education programs and canoe experiences. This past year, in response to the COVID pandemic, we pivoted from classroom presentations to online programs. And through our online programs, we reached over 6,800 students, connecting them to the Boundary Waters. We had local paddle days in Minnesota for over 200 students and parents, where we taught them how to paddle. This included Black, Hmong, LGBTQ students in St. Paul and in Minneapolis. We had programs at Lake Phelan and Theater Worth. We also had programs in Ely, where we brought Ely high school and middle school students actually out into the Boundary Waters on a canoe trip. Typically, each year, we bring 30 to 60 students on scholarships on wilderness canoe experiences for about a week. The COVID and fires, the wildfires this season have reduced that number. Next year, we intend to return to that level and probably get closer to 100. And right now, we're partnering with St. Scholastica to collect stories from Anishinaabe elders and infuse that into our education program. And our third pillar is community. So we understand that the communities that are gateways to the Boundary Waters must thrive in order for the wilderness to be protected. We've worked with the Ely State Theater to help the Ely State Theater keep open during the COVID pandemic. We work with Ely Community Resources, which provides enrichment activities for Ely students after school. We supported legislation here in Minnesota to expand broadband service throughout greater Minnesota. And this week, we convened a meeting with several local businessmen and representatives from elected officials to talk about how they can make it through in response to the economic impact from the wildfires that have shut down their businesses. I'll provide an overview of our project here. There are 4 key points that I want you to take away from this. First, this is great habitat, great terrestrial forest habitat, great shoreline habitat, and this will provide more public hunting and fishing and achieves the Lessard-Sams Outdoor Heritage Council priorities. It really knocks it out of the park. And these are the top priorities for the Superior National Forest to be protected. Second, there's great urgency to this project. If these properties are not protected now, they will be developed. Third, we will be great stewards of this land. We have researched for over a year how to manage and develop the resources to respond to this impending loss of habitat at the edge of the Boundary Waters. We understand that the Superior National Forest and other conservation stewards are not going to step up, and we're willing to do that. And we're filling this vacuum, and we will be great stewards for this property for years to come. And then finally, we understand that we need to make a win-win, that the communities must thrive in order for conservation to thrive. We have the support of the local Lake Association for this project, and we will pay property taxes, which currently amount to about $15,000 a year. We'll enter into whatever binding agreements are needed to make that stick. So first, the first topic again is habitat, and Hudson will talk more about that.
Hello? Perfect. So a little description of the habitat we're talking about here is 686 acres of forest land, over 2 miles of shoreline on the South Kawishwe River that has an abundance of wild rice, and 3,500 feet of shoreline on Snowbank Lake. So the forest type that we're seeing on these properties is a mixture of jack pine, white pine, red pine forest, hardwood conifer forest, spruce swamp, and those riparian zones heavily covered in ash. These properties are in a few different successional phases, primarily in that old growth phase, and showing very little forest health issues, which is creating prime habitat for the iconic moose, the American black bear, white-tailed deer, fisher marten, gray wolf, Canada lynx, rough and spruce grouse, woodcock, several different species of waterfowl, countless non-game species like the northern goshawk, trumpeter swan, common loon, warblers, thrushes, flycatchers.
Great. With respect to the urgency here, land is now selling very rapidly at the edge of the Boundary Waters. 80 acres adjacent to the project area sold in May, right before we were going to submit this grant application. Another 40 acres at the edge of the Boundary Waters sold in March. So this land will be sold, we know the market out there, and we understand the need to act now here. Third, we researched for over a year, establishing an internal working group how to manage this land properly. The Superior National Forest is not in a position, even though this is a top priority for them to own and manage the property. They're involved in the school trust land buyout program, and for years to come, they're unable to act to conserve this. We established a Conservation Advisory Council that includes the world's foremost expert on boreal forests from the University of Minnesota, a Vermilion Community College natural resources instructor, and the lead ranger from the district ranger from the Superior National Forest. And we will infuse this property as part of our No Boundaries to the Boundary Waters program to bring students out into the boundary waters on wilderness canoe trips.
And to elaborate a little bit more on how we're going to be able to manage this property, so we have a very strong volunteer workforce for the Friends that in a typical non-COVID year sees over 3,000 service hours working with wilderness rangers in the wilderness, implementing management practices on the landscape. The other key aspect to our management plan is our strong relationship with VCC. So Vermilion Community College has a renowned natural resources program where they implement a lot of classroom time, lab time outside, out and doing actual field work. And so this is an opportunity for them to conduct their wildlife surveys, population censuses, timber cruising, land surveying, invertebrate sampling, all the dendrology and silviculture lab work that's included there. They're getting their firefighting certificates to become wildland firefighters and having the opportunity to have this field work, this lab work on property that they haven't been using for years after years after years. The 40 acres that they currently use is invaluable to gaining that real world experience. And so this is really exciting for us because as these students learn and grow, they are also collecting data that we then will be able to hand over to our Conservation Advisory Council to analyze and create specific management plans for these properties. The other key aspect to this that we briefly touched on earlier with the management plan is we're opening up this private land to public hunting for the first time. So we're seeing access for locals and tourists and opportunity for these people to get out there and enjoy hunting on land that hasn't been accessed before. And with the ease of access to these properties, it just creates a tremendous opportunity to introduce new people to the sport. So it's really exciting.
And again, our fourth point, this is a win-win. We will pay property taxes on this property and we will conserve it. And we have the support of the local lake association. So in conclusion, this is great forest habitat, great shoreline habitat, and it achieves the priorities of this council. Second, there's great urgency. We need to act now or it'll be developed. Third, we'll be great stewards of this property. And fourth, again, we'll pay property taxes. At the end of the day, this is about competing visions. It's about protecting the boreal forest, the undeveloped shoreline, the riparian shoreline, having deer hunters, duck hunters, anglers, and students accessing the property by canoeing, or we would have McMansion cabins that are not open to the public on it. So I hope you choose the first vision for this project. We welcome your questions. Thank you so much for this opportunity.
Questions? Tom?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Tom Saxa. I'm a little worried about the fact that, whether you like your organization or you don't like your organization, that you're controversial. And we haven't really dealt with the controversy that we're talking about here, and it's very strong on both sides. So it's different. What I'm really getting at for a question, because I do have a question, is there somebody or some organization? I know we've had a lot of great organizations like the Nature Conservancy or the Trust for Public Land, who specialize in this type of land management. And have you thought about partnering with them, or to modify some of the feelings that may come out?
Thank you, Council Member. Saxog. As part of our research, we did indeed reach out to the Nature Conservancy, and I know Mr. Pressman is here from the Nature Conservancy. I won't speak for them, but their management objectives are for a working forest, for a different approach to it, using those conservation easements to protect working forests. So this is not on their radar screen. The Trust for Public Land does not own land permanently. The Minnesota Land Trust does not own land permanently. The Superior National Forest can't do this for years to come. I understand Lake County is here. They don't want this property protected that way. So we're kind of stepping into that vacuum, and we studied this for a year and view this as an extension of our first pillar, protecting the wilderness. And so we will be good stewards for this property, and this is a continuation of the legacy that Bud Heinzelman, one of our founders, one of the premier boreal forest researcher of his time. We look forward to, he started this land conservation work in the 1980s, and this is a continuation of that. I hope that a project like this can be a bridge that brings people together, Councilmember Saxog.
Follow-up. Well, so do you anticipate this being an extension of the Boundary Waters Canoe Area?
I view this as an extension of protecting wildlife habitat and forest habitat at the edge of the boundary waters.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Scott Dibble. Thank you, colleague Saxhog, for naming the gorilla sitting in the room. 'Cause I think this is the only project that's come forward that we've gotten significant communication on. So I'm glad we're talking about the issue of Friends of the Boundary Waters and part of their other work that they do that's controversial. And I'll only suggest a couple of things. One is, a lot of organizations, have policy agendas. A lot of us work on a number of things. You and I, when we served together, agreed on many things, but crossed swords pretty strenuously, but still found the ability to find space to work together on the things that we agreed on. I think Friends has addressed, from what I can tell, I've read through the objections and has addressed those objections, namely, of course, the fact that the property would be kept from development and hence kept off the tax rolls, and that issue has been addressed. And to your question, would this be an extension of the boundary waters? I think they've answered that in the affirmative, no, and it would be available for kinds of uses that otherwise are restricted in the boundary waters. So I think a lot of those issues are addressed, but I'm glad we're grappling with this, because even some of our other proposers do their work in ways and have policy agendas that some think are controversial. If you don't doubt me, just talk to Gene Wagenius and how they feel about some of the land banking and land trust and land investment techniques of some of our larger proposers. I mean, we have controversy all over the place, but I think we can confine ourselves to the square corners of this proposal, and we should do that. Thanks.
Mark, did you have?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mark Holston. Senator Dibble, I'm sorry, you've been getting a lot of information on this. I haven't. So that's kind of surprising to me. I guess I'm kind of sitting in
I don't think I've gotten any more information than all of us have gotten.
Oh, all right. Because the only letter I had seen was from Lake County, and so I guess that was part of my first question. Going back to some of our conversations last night about the stress of fee title acquisition in the political sphere of the state, and I know the northern counties have traditionally been kind of the sword bearer for that tension, and I understand the reasons why, but part of it, one of the things that was in the activity details I guess the question is, have you resolved, Lake County sent us a letter, and it's not in our packet, but I remember it kind of. I remember the essence of the letter. Have you been working with Lake County to resolve those issues? Is the first question, I guess.
Sure. We approached Lake County on our own, kind of in one of those cold winter days, and let them know what we were trying to do, because we didn't want to surprise them, and let them know what we wanted to do here at the land conservation, and then they put the microphone, get it for the record there, right, Joe? Okay. And so we approached them proactively to do that. They did not express to us a definite opinion one way or another, and then we saw a letter from them saying that they opposed it. But what we were built in right up the front, and told the commissioner on our Zoom call that we would pay property tax, that we understand your concerns, we understand the concern about maintaining the tax base with a high degree of public ownership, and we wanted to create a win-win, and that was kind of meeting in the middle, council member, and so that's what we did, and so that's kind of where we're at on this.
Okay, so you haven't.
We haven't resolved. I mean,
That was my question, I guess. Is
Okay, well,
have you worked to resolve it?
well, what we did is we got a letter a month out of the blue, sort of saying they opposed our project, and
Okay.
So.
Mr. Chair, the other question I had was going back to if you were to prioritize the parcels. Got a lot of requests, not enough money to fund it all. If you were to prioritize these particular parcels, what would be the order that you would prioritize them?
Sure. The first would be the property on Snowbank. So Snowbank Lake is one of those gateway properties of lakes into the boundary waters. And so that roughly 80 acres is just south of a portage, and we want to protect that lakeshore view. It has about 3,500 feet of lakeshore on that. The second one would be the South Cowish River. That has over 2 miles of shoreline on it. That's under less threat of immediate development than the Snowbank Lake one. That will be immediately developed. And then the third one would be that forest corridor between Snowbank Lake and Lake One. So in that priority, Snowbank Lake, South Cowish River, then the forest corridor between Snowbank Lake and Lake One.
Okay.
Jamie?
I already brought my own chair today, but it makes me feel like a little kid. It's more comfortable though. Jamie Becker Finn, and I understand that, there are folks outside of what our role is here that make things controversial. I mean, I would hope that everybody serving on this council shares the value and shares, we are tasked with projects that protect, restore, and enhance habitat, and that's exactly what the project does. I think as far as, any concern, certainly don't want local governments to be, opposed to the projects that we're doing, but I think we're concerned about property taxes being paid. They're saying they're going to pay the property taxes. To me, that seems like it's sort of resolved. If that was the issue, now there's an answer to the issue that I assume is what they want, which is to continue to keep things on the property tax rolls. So, I would just remind us that our role here is within the confines of what was in the constitutional amendment, and I think this absolutely does that. And I'm excited about the possibilities for the additional hunting and fishing access, because what we see is that things get developed, and there are big fancy cabins and second homes for people, and that is not helping the rest of our state and the 99.9% of us who may want to access these places. So I really like this proposal, and I know it's hard to be a first-time, as we touched on yesterday, first-time applicant. Certainly there are things to learn in the way that proposals are framed, but I think at the end of the day, this project is protecting habitat, and that's got to be what drives our decisions here, because that's what's in the Constitution.
Other questions? Great. Oh, Ashley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ashley Peters. I was just hoping you could say a little bit more about specifically how this property will be managed for for wildlife. So specific things that would be done to encourage more wildlife to end up in this area.
Sure. Well, I think the key thing here is what we're seeing is preventing forest fragmentation. So we're keeping those wildlife corridors in contact at the way they are. And so what we are envisioning with a management plan is having like a wilderness aesthetic to it. So, you know, there is edge habitat that exists in a few places, and then there's the change in succession where we're seeing, you know, young aspen regen where grouse are able to move in there and moose and deer are browsing. And then we're also seeing like coarse woody debris deep into the old growth spots where the fish or marten are finding habitat that is, you know, disappearing on the landscape. And so managing for those and keeping that aesthetic is going to be the main thing that we do there. And so having like Vermilion Community College students go out and have the wildlife censuses or population censuses and wildlife surveys and seeing what's there, and then taking that and figuring out how to create a management plan to either increase those opportunities for wildlife to succeed or maintaining that aesthetic is going to be the approach there, and using our Conservation Advisory Council to put their brains together and come up with like an overall goal for that is what we're envisioning for this property.
Just a quick follow-up question. So you mentioned grouse. So usually grouse are attracted to areas that have been either thinned or, right, like there's a very good mix. So I guess that's really what I'm, like how are you going to ensure that there's like a really good mix of habitat there?
Sure. Well, the key there is going to be like we're seeing a lot of die-off from spruce budworm in certain areas of that of northeastern Minnesota, and a fuels reduction is key to that. So on top of that, where we're going to be, you know, kind of doing regen focused areas specifically on different parts of the property that would create the opportunity for like aspen regen once the balsam and conifer stories are changed. But what we really are at this stage in the level is in the implementing what kind of management plans we want to do. So until we get that data and see what we can, you know, accomplish on the landscape is kind of where we're at right now. But the idea of, you know, creating that regen and that new habitat in different sections of the property will be key, because we do want to manage this for wildlife habitat, especially grouse. And what's really exciting is the amount of spruce grouse I've already seen on the property cruising up there, which, you know, as we know, is disappearing slowly. So stuff like that's pretty exciting. But we just have to create those management plans to see that we have populations succeed in these areas.
All right, thank you very much. We appreciate your coming down and talking to us today.
Thank you.
Next on our list, Minnesota FAO2, Minnesota Forest Recovery Project Phase 2. Go ahead.
Okay, good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the council. And thank you for the opportunity to share our proposal with you. My name is Jim Manolis. I am Forest Conservation Program Director with the Nature Conservancy. And joining me here today is Nate Ide from Lake County. He's the Land Commissioner. Chris Dunham, Forest Manager for the Nature Conservancy based in Duluth, and Michael Pressman, who is now our global lead for protection strategies for the Nature Conservancy, and he's finishing up with some help on this proposal. So our project addresses some of the challenging conditions we see in the forest right now. You know about the Greenwood fire. It's at 26,000 acres. This is an example of some of the risks we're seeing in the forest. While we're blessed with an abundant forest in northern Minnesota, much of the forest, really hundreds of thousands of acres of the forest, is in poor condition. Especially along the North Shore, you see dead and dying trees that have been stressed by past droughts, with brush and invasive species choking out the chance for new seedlings to grow. And you know, we have a host of insect issues, emerald ash borers moving north. We've got a huge issue with eastern larch beetle. Spruce budworm is really impacting the forest now. A couple 100,000 acres issue right now. And to top it off, the current drought and expected future droughts will stress the forest even more. So we know that the forest industry and regular agency budgets are need to play a major role in addressing these issues, but they simply can't do everything that is needed. So our project can help address these broader issues of forest health, provide huge benefits for wildlife and other values like carbon sequestration, water quality, and recreational opportunities. So we've already delivered impressive results in phase 1 of our project. We've engaged multiple partners and completed many actions across large landscapes to improve the health and diversity of both young and mature forests. Partners have ranged from the Rough Grouse Society to the agencies like DNR and the Forest Service to tribal groups like the Leech Lake Band and to multiple counties. So far, we've enhanced over 4,800 acres of forest to increase habitat value for diverse game and non-game species, and this far exceeds our target of 2,400 acres. We're under budget and expect to enhance over 1,000 additional acres by the time we complete phase 1 next year. So for phase 2, we build on this success by adding a conservation easement component and by increasing the scale of our enhancement work. What we plan to do is to protect 7,300 acres of forest through conservation easements and enhance about 2,400 acres, 24,000 acres of degraded forests. Now, this is scaling up substantially. We request about $9.6 million for this. 2/3 of the budget is allocated to habitat enhancement and 1/3 to easement acquisition. So I will talk about the easement component first here with a little more detail. This is the newest part. So we've recently seen an uptick in development pressures, and this has really increased potential for fragmentation and parcelization across northern Minnesota and its associated impacts on northern Minnesota. So to address this, we aim to acquire conservation easements to fill protection gaps within 4 counties in northeast Minnesota. We'll focus on some of the largest and most important gaps in what we call our resilient and connected lands network. Now, this is a mapping exercise that identifies areas most resilient to climate change. New conservation easements will aim to avoid forest fragmentation and the costly extension of services to remote areas while keeping lands on the tax rolls. To implement this program, we'll work closely with DNR Forest for the Future program and Minnesota Land Trust and other partners to refine selection criteria. As we work with landowners, we'll determine which easement holder would be the best fit. Could be DNR, could be MLT, or could be TNC. We'll utilize existing pool of interested landowners to capitalize on their interest. We already have some strong interest in several projects, and we'll use additional outreach to meet the goals of the proposal. So we've consulted with DNR grants and Outdoor Heritage Council staff to determine the best way to structure the grant to provide this flexibility, to really allow us to be nimble and to have the accountability needed. So now we'll get into the forest enhancement component. The proposal in the handout covers the range of enhancement treatments we're proposing. They're broad. There's many. We've covered a lot of things already. We'll give a couple examples here. Chris Dunham from the Nature Conservancy will give the first one.
Thanks, Mr. Chair and members. I'm Chris Dunham with the Nature Conservancy, Forest Manager out of Duluth. I'll give an example of a site 50 miles north of Duluth on DNR Forestry administered land that we've worked on in phase 1 that we call the Bundle Lake Road site. There'd been some timber harvesting there in the past, but most of this 60-acre site did not have enough merchantable timber for harvest and consisted of scattered poor form paper birch, a little balsam fir, and a lot of brush where the trees should have been. From a soils perspective, this was a high-quality upland site that was severely underperforming in terms of its potential for growing a mix of tree species that would contribute to providing wildlife habitat and many other ecosystem services. We used phase 1 funds to shear off the brush in the winter with a bulldozer. This prepared the site for tree planting and set the stage for young forest growth, while leaving a mix of tree ages, structures, and species that would benefit ruffed grouse other young forest species like golden wing warblers, veeries, and deer. In the spring, we planted 35,000 white pine, red pine, white spruce, and red oak. A new age class of aspen will now grow up along with the planted conifers next to aspen from the earlier timber harvest that will provide good grouse and woodcock habitat. Young forest conditions will be maintained on the site for the next 10 to 20 years. Beyond that, we'll have some additional options. The conifers and oaks will gradually mature and provide habitat value for a different suite of species like evening grosbeaks and black bears. Improving tree species diversity and the resulting diversity of tree sizes and ages will also help provide resilience to climate change and related issues that put low diversity forests at risk. We're very happy to have the Lake County Land Commissioner with us here today. Nate's going to describe a proposed treatment scenario on Lake County land.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Members, my name is Nate Iden, the Land Commissioner for Lake County out of Two Harbors. A couple of things this morning. First of all, I'm very appreciative for Nature Conservancy and all the help that they have given Lake County. Some of our management priorities that we have that with the skeleton staff that I have is just really hard to get done. So the things that they've helped with have been super helpful, and the collaboration we've had with Jim and Chris have been more than appreciative. The management proposal that this proposal seeks to help is the spruce budworm balsam issue. There's the DNR does a flight every once in a while, and they've identified over 10,000 acres of balsam that's been damaged by spruce budworm on Lake County land. So that's really hard to get managed. It's hard to do a timber sale on solid dead balsam. So this proposal would help get that cleared up. It would help. It would remove the balsam, and then we would come back and plant it for the next go round and for much better habitat. So, thank you, Mr. Chair, members.
Okay, well, those are just a couple examples. We plan to carry out many other examples, including some prescribed firework, and to really enhance the diversity and health of both young and mature forests. We and our partners see a major need for increased protection and enhancement in northern Minnesota forests. We've really worked hard at coordinating complex projects across many partners and large landscapes, and our progress, our results and our acres with Phase 1 shows this. So we ask for your support for Phase 2. And we thank you, and we're happy to take questions.
Scott.
Thank you. I appreciate those examples. I'm curious about, I was looking at your proposal, some discussion about black ash. I'm curious, what is the future of, the black ash wetlands? I know we had a presentation in a Senate committee, and I didn't know just how dire the circumstance was with the implications for wetlands. In northern Minnesota, the black ash wetlands, of course, manage the hydrology of these wetlands, and if they get wiped out, those wetlands turn into standing open water, and reestablishing those forest lands is impossible. I think they're looking at forms of oak or hackberry or elm. What are we going to do about those, and is this a part of the proposal?
Sure. Thank you, Senator Dibble. Yes, so the future of black ash is pretty bleak with emerald ash borer. And there's a lot of research going on right now on the best ways to manage it and mitigate the change that we're expecting. We're beginning a project up on the Leech Lake Reservation in collaboration with the band and others. What we plan to do is to plant cedar, to plant some oak species, and we're evaluating the suite of species right now. But it's a neat project on one site that we want to use. We want to use the best research to figure out how to demonstrate, how to diversify these stands and help them transition to a different type of situation.
Go ahead.
So would this proposal contemplate a project or two like that?
Absolutely. So this would, we would be the one I mentioned was part of our Phase 1, but we're including more of those sites in Phase 2 as well.
Other questions? Tom?
just a comment. This is my idea of forest management. Thank you for bringing this proposal, phase 2.
Thank you.
Others? I'd like you to address the DSS, which seemed awfully high when I looked at this, which is primarily either acquisition or contracts for the work.
So the DSS is about 5% overall, the overall budget. And I know this is a perennial topic. With the Nature Conservancy's accounting structure, we need to find a way to cover some of our human resources, our accounting systems, our legal services that go into, we have many different contracts that get involved with all this work. There's a suite of things that need to be covered. So this is how we cover it. It's about 5%. It's lower than some of what we've seen in past proposals. I guess the final comment on that, really what's most important in our view is the results, and we're showing results. We're getting a lot done, and we plan to get more done.
Jamie?
Thank you, Chair. Jamie Swenson. In your proposal, you mentioned multiple advisory partners. Can you explain that a little bit more as far as how that works, what the process is?
Sure, and it's been a little different with the COVID situation. We've had a little less of that than is ideal, but we have many partners. Rough Grouse Society is an example of one of them, which I've been talking with John Steigerwalt recently, and it's kind of an informal advisory work, but we talk about best approaches for management on sites. Another example is NRI biologists, experts on forest habitat. We're engaged in a lot of conversations with them and best approaches to managing. So there's sort of a broader advisory network. There's numerous partners involved with that, but then there's the key partners that are actually the landowners and the ones that we work with most closely on the ground. We typically have a meeting per year where we gather everybody together and get the advice. And I guess I do want to mention our work with Leech Lake Band. They've been an advisory partner and becoming a partner with on the groundwork. I mentioned the work with Black Ash, but increasingly they're working with us on prescribed fire, and really neat project up there with prescribed fire. We're able to engage some of the tribal college students as well in some monitoring work, and so that was exciting to do that kind of work with a broad network of partners.
I think we're done. Thank you very much. We appreciate your time this morning.
Thank you.
Next is FA01, 2022 Camp Ripley Sentinel Landscape ACUV Phase 10. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good morning, council members. We are here today to represent the Camp Ripley Sentinel Landscape Partnership, the ACUB proposal, Phase 10. Today here speaking with me is Brigadier General Lowell Cruz from Camp Ripley. And we'll have our other partners available for questions, Josh Pennington from Camp Ripley Environmental, Todd Holman with the Nature Conservancy and our Sentinel Landscape Coordinator, and Bill Penning with Bowser, our partner in our conservation rim easements. So we're a large working landscape with 800,000 acres located along 50 miles of the Mississippi River. In north central Minnesota, where historic prairie meets forest. Much of the land surrounding our 53,000 acre hub of Camp Ripley is in 40-acre parcels owned and managed by private landowners who have a strong connection to their land. It is inhabited by resident and migratory wildlife species and surrounded by wetland complexes, lake systems, and other tributaries to the Mississippi River. The forested region of our work area crosses the counties of Cass, Crow Wing, and Morrison. And like I said, it's where agriculture transitions to existing forested lands. Thousands of acres in and around this area are being converted from forest to annual cropping, primarily corn and potatoes. But it's also subject to development pressures from the Brainerd-Baxter area, as we're along the corridor of 371 that connects Little Falls and Brainerd and Baxter. This area of the state is also the highest for conversion of pasture lands to row cropping. In 2004, we started our ACUB program, that's the Army Compatible Use Buffer Program, with the goal to limit residential land development around camp to reduce land use conflicts that were occurring with the military operations happening there. But what developed from our ACUB program since then has been the opportunity to achieve multiple natural resource benefits that we could expand on our conservation efforts, especially sustainable forestry management. In 2016, Camp Ripley was designated as a federal Sentinel landscape, one of 7 in the entire country. And with this in our state designation, it led to the additional coordination, partnerships, leveraging ability, and impact within our 10-mile working area. So on a day-to-day basis, it's not super glamorous, right? In my office, what we're doing is we're coordinating and talking with landowners to secure one easement at a time. We maintain our landowner database of over 350 interested landowners. It's been built on trust and a willingness of these landowners to forego the money that they could have received if they had divided up their parcels and sold for additional development. It's also been built on our partnerships at the county level in the cities of Baxter and Little Falls that support our program. But it's more than just this local support, obviously. We're not doing random acts of conservation anymore. I hear this, from our other state partners. We're doing everything that we can to ensure that the taxpayer dollars that you entrust us with are being used on the highest quality parcels. In your packet, you have our ranking tool, which was developed to prioritize for high-quality wildlife complexes and to make sure that the parcels that are located nearest to where people want to develop and along roads are given the highest ranking. We also use evaluation criteria for ecological and habitat factors for resident and migratory wildlife species. And the biggest thing here, too, is we've limited our work area. So, as you know, we work with the 5-mile area around Camp Ripley for our easement program because we want to make the biggest amount of impact with these dollars that are going to provide landscape scale benefits that are going to protect from that fragmentation. You have the handout in front of you, and the stats to me speak volumes, and I hope they do to you as well. Because 50% of our landscape now is in some sort of permanent protection. What we're asking you today is to support our program again. I realize this is phase 10, but this proposal, what we are looking to do is to work with those landowners that are directly adjacent to the existing public lands that we have within our 5-mile boundary. Some of these landowners aren't in our database. We want to outreach, we want to get them to sign up, and we believe that we can do that. There's a map on the handout that circles these public lands that are already there. They include the Pillsbury State Forest, the Lake Alexander, Woods, SNA, Euro WMA. There's Camp Ripley lands that are outside of the main camp that are open to the public and managed by Camp Ripley. And then there's where we all started our relationship with the council, which is the little Nokasippi WMA and the Crow Wing County Forest right next to it. By buffering these public lands, we are preventing habitat conversion on the adjacent lands that the state has already made a huge investment in. Now, we all know that forests are really important and critical for wildlife habitat, for game and non-game species, but we also know that they lessen the water quality contamination from land use practices. These protection efforts mean cleaner water, source water, for the residents of St. Cloud, Minneapolis, and St. Paul, because the Mississippi is the source water for these communities. Now, the general can go into more detail as to why we need your support, but you can't even imagine to think how much of an impact your support means to me and my office on a day-to-day basis. We've got a lot of other programs and projects that are going on that these guys can speak to, but for me specifically in our office, at our little district office, your support has allowed us just recently within the last month to leverage a direct agreement with the Natural Resource Conservation Service to give us funding for a full-time forester to work in our landscape. This is like a dream team for me, right? I've never had a forester. This is going to help us a ton. It's also giving us money to work and contract with the Forest Stewards Guild, which is going to deliver regional training for agency professionals and landowners on prescribed burning. We're using your money to help leverage funds like this for cost share and for these programs to build resiliency into our landscape.
So good morning. I just want to talk a little bit about the synergy we have in the Sentinel landscape around Camp Ripley and the ability to bring all these organizations together and develop good ideas into things like, as she just talked, NRCS housing a state forester in our county office at Camp Ripley. And the National Guard's commitment to that is to provide the office space, and with that, we know that comes a little direction as well as we try to do my overall mission, which is to protect the millions of dollars of investment at Camp Ripley. And so your support to that through the grants that we've received from the Heritage Fund continues to show that strong state match that the federal government expects me to have when we go back to them and apply for REPI funds, and eventually out of that REPI fund, the Army slice of it, the Army Compatible Use Buffer Program. So, you know, that program over the last, since 2004 has provided almost, well, over $43 million worth of federal money coming back into that landscape to purchase perpetual easements around Camp Ripley and prevent the development that is so threatening for us. You know, we understand, you know, the land available up in Baxter and by Lake Alexandria is some pretty high demand land, and the ability that we've had over the last period of time to leverage money to protect that and keep it into some form of forest or grassland that is supporting wildlife and supporting my mission of protecting Camp Ripley is pretty cool. This project will allow us to create, continue to create wildlife buffers around already protected land, and it'll increase the amount of wildlife that is on that protected land as a natural result from that. So pretty excited about that. You know, other examples that we're working with, we're very involved right now with our tribal consultation. By federal law, we are required to meet with the tribes annually. Out of that has come some very cool things that we've developed. An example would be we have a grant from the Historical Society to look across the whole Sentinel landscape, that 5-mile buffer area around Camp Ripley, to identify sensitive cultural sites that are potentially on private land in that, so that we can help focus some of our conservation efforts in the future on trying to protect some of those sites as well. And then, and then we're reaching out to the tribes as well and doing a lot of cultural relations kind of events. So we have a great event this fall that we call Planning for the Future, where we bring high school kids from the tribal high schools to Ripley, and we pair them up with serving soldiers, and we learn a little bit about their culture, and they get a chance to learn a little bit about the National Guard, which, when you talk to their elders, is pretty important of creating opportunities for their kids as well. And centered around that is a conservation effort of, returning some of our native grasses back to the plant species that we had on Ripley originally. So that's a cool, a very cool event for us. So I just am incredibly thankful for the support of the council over the last 10 increments of projects that we worked there, and we look forward to your continued support. Thank you.
Questions? Great. Well, thank you very much. We appreciate you coming down today. Next is FAO4, Minnesota Forests for the Future, Phase 9. Go ahead.
Let's see, is this on? Sounds like it. Good morning. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, council members. Thank you, staff. It's good to be here today. This is the only second time for me coming before the council for a funding request, and of course the first time in person, so it's really good to be here. My name is Christine Ostern, and I coordinate the Forest Legacy and Minnesota Forests for the Future program, conservation easement programs in the Division of Forestry for DNR. And I've been in this role for about 2.5 years, filling the vacancy left by longtime program leader Richard Peterson when he retired in 2018. So I'm still trying to fill some really big shoes. I did bring an extra handout with me today that I think has been passed out to you all. Our program works with willing landowners to purchase conservation easements and property in fee to protect large blocks of working forest and important habitat. Land that is protected through these voluntary easements stays in private ownership. We work with partners to reach landowners to identify, prioritize, and fund projects. One of the partnerships we are currently growing is working with the Board of Water and Soil Resources and County Soil and Water Conservation Districts to help implement the protection goals that they have in their watershed planning and landscape stewardship planning efforts. We also continue to work with our non-governmental organization partners to coordinate our protection efforts, both at the regional scale and statewide. And you heard an example of that just this morning from Jim from the Nature Conservancy. The Forest Legacy Program, a federal program which we coordinate within Minnesota, is a complementary program to the Minnesota Forests for the Future program, providing staffing dollars and project funding. We have acquired and administer some of the largest conservation easements in the federal program in the U.S. Forest Service Northeast Midwest Region 9. Our conservation easement program began in the early to mid-1990s. Since 2000, our program has protected over 360,000 acres in easement and over 9,000 acres of property in fee. Our program in the Division of Forestry comprises only 4% of the total easements held by DNR, but over 92% of the total acres held in easement by DNR. To date, our protection efforts have an appraised value of over $88 million with a purchase price of approximately $85 million. The total funds we have received over the history of our program is $92 million. Of that, 62% has come from state sources, 18% from federal, and 20% from private. Now I'm going to speak a little about the public benefits from our program, which are many. 99% of our easement acres provide public access for hunting, fishing, hiking, and other recreational uses. Our conservation easements and property and fee keep large blocks of intact forest and habitat, keeping watersheds healthy and habitat healthy. Our working forest conservation easements help sustain the regional timber-based economy and recreation tourism-based economies by protecting the land base and providing public access. Easement properties are managed using sustainable forest management plans and best management practices. We conduct annual monitoring visits to all of the property and with each landowner to ensure that the easement terms are being followed and our investment is protected in perpetuity. In terms of mitigating climate change, there is much natural climate solution potential in Minnesota. We just need to continue to strategically invest in it. At the Council's May meeting, the Nature Conservancy reported through their research that reforestation and improved forest management are the two most impactful actions we can take for sequestering carbon and mitigating climate change. All of our working forest conservation easements are required to have a forest management plan. The permanent and perpetual connection established with private landowners because of the easement to professional forest managers helps to increase forest management and more activities such as reforestation. Now I'm going to speak a little bit about our request before you today. We are requesting funding for Phase 9 of the Minnesota Forest for the Future program. Our request is for just over $3.9 million, which will be used to purchase 3,329 acres of easement and 1,020 acres of property and fee. Our programs are offered statewide and are very popular. The rate which we receive contacts and requests from interested landowners continues to accelerate, demonstrating in part the threat to our forests and the need for more forest protection. The need and demand for forest protection through the programs we offer far outpaces our capacity and resources. We have worked to strategically select the parcels that are before you today in our application. The projects we are proposing are located across the state in Hubbard, Itasca, Morrison, Otter Tail, Rice, and Todd counties. The emphasis of our request is purchasing conservation easements with the remainder to purchase property and fee title in Hubbard County. And this would be from the Conservation Fund as part of the Minnesota Heritage Forest Project. Those parcels that are identified were identified actually while that property was still owned by Potlatch, and the process that we go through internally to review and approve work on projects like this had already taken place while it was owned by Potlatch. And we did receive support from the local towns in Hubbard County for those acquisitions and have since received renewed support from those same local decision makers for completing the acquisition from the Conservation Fund. In summary, I just wanted to boil it down. Our purpose is to protect high conservation value forest from fragmentation and conversion. When forests are protected, it's good for everything and everybody. Fish and wildlife habitat is protected. Water quality is protected. Groundwater and drinking water is protected. Jobs in the forest industry and recreation are protected. Private property ownership is protected. Climate change is mitigated, and public access is protected. And that's all I have for you today. I'd be happy to take any questions or concerns. Thank you.
Questions? Tom?
Well, you hear this every year, but this is the organization that holds the easements for the Blandon conservation easement, and you know, that was kind of the crown jewel of the whole thing. But it's been a model, as you know, Christine, for all all easements in the future. So.
Yes, that's true. Could I respond to that comment? Okay. Thank you. I have been watching, virtually the meetings that the council has had. And I remember I think it was the January meeting, the University of Minnesota came to report on the performance of the Outdoor Heritage Fund in terms of I think there was 4 different aspects that they looked at that came out of your plan of operation. And I remember that researcher having to state several times that they needed to remove the Blandon easement from their calculations and analysis because it was such an outlier that it so skewed the data for how important this work is and in the investment that we all have made in it. So, thank you.
Other questions? Looks like we're good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next is FAO 5, Big Woods Protection at Stieg Woods, which I'm sure I pronounced wrong and I apologize. But you can correct me.
Good morning. Wow, sorry.
Morning.
Thank you all for allowing us to come here this morning to discuss our grant request. My name is Rick Ely. I'm the mayor of the city of Rogers. Again, as you mentioned before, our project is called Big Wood Protection at Stieg Woods. With me today is City Administrator Steve Stamer, Public Works Director John Seifert, and they will discuss this request with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, members of the council. As the mayor stated, I'm Steve Stamer. I'm the city administrator for the city of Rogers. So I grew up on a century farm in Iowa that includes many of these types of woods, several woods of the type that we're talking here today. And my parents are reaching an age where pretty rapidly they're going to have to start making decisions about what to do with their property as their kids are off in other states. So this project really is fairly personal to me as well. Again, the mayor mentioned we have John Seifert from our Public Works and Recreation Department. I'm going to provide the overall presentation here. John will be able to answer any more technical questions at the end. So like any good administrator, I bring smarter people along with me to answer those technical pieces. So I think there are very few big woods properties like this remaining in the 7-county metro area and in Hennepin County in particular. This project, again, the Stieg Woods Big Woods Protection Project, is seeking just over $1.1 million to purchase nearly 21 acres in the city of Rogers. 20 of those acres would be high-quality big woods type property. And really the intent of this acquisition is to continue the stewardship of the woods that has been accomplished by the Stieg family for decades. And Denny and Janice Stieg are here with us today, just in case you have any questions for them at the end. They have, again, for decades taken care of these woods. This is a property that was actually originally deeded to the original owners with a signed deed by Abraham Lincoln. So this property's been around for a while, obviously. The woods includes more than 2,100 trees dominated primarily by sugar maples. Also includes hickory, basswood, ironwood, and various oaks. It is a very high-quality habitat with a small amount of invasive species primarily on the perimeter of the property. We believe that this project addresses the council's priorities in 3 primary ways. First, it contributes to the protection of natural areas for wildlife habitat and birding sites. Second, it contributes to natural resource corridor, that being connection of Crowhassan Park Reserve to the west and Elm Creek Park Reserve to the east. It also protects and enhances the high-quality big woods forest, including protection from invasive species. Immediate acquisition, we believe, is important for several reasons. As one of the fastest-growing cities in the state of Minnesota, development is really encroaching this property from all sides. I think you've heard that from others today, but definitely true with this site. You may or may not know the Dayton Parkway interchange is a new interstate interchange along I-94 between Maple Grove Parkway 610, and then 101 to the east. That interchange is going to open to traffic in 2022. And with that, this Big Woods property is less than a mile away from that new interchange. So the development pressure is going to increase exponentially at that time. The Stieg family, again, in terms of immediacy, the Stieg family is committed today to a partial donation in partnership to make this happen. There's no guarantees what will happen in the future with changing circumstances, family dynamics, but at this time we have an opportunity to make this project happen. What will the grant specifically accomplish? So again, it would acquire nearly 21 acres of high-quality big woods, would help remove invasive species for the perimeter of the forest, would also include restoration of a 5-acre strip of land that is currently being tilled between the woods and Rush Creek, so really creating a buffer there between those properties. And again, the protection of a unique habitat that's going to be immediately adjacent. So these big woods, the 5-acre strip, will be immediately adjacent to a 200-acre wetland that is going to be owned and maintained by the city into perpetuity as well. So it really leverages a much larger area being connected. Grant outcomes, again, looking to provide that natural corridor for connecting wildlife between Crowhasset Park Reserve and to the west, and Elm Creek Park Reserve to the east, providing rest, shelter, and a food source for wildlife in that natural resource corridor. So some activities that taxpayers will directly benefit from include a public access to that high-quality environment. Site is at a crossroad of multiple regional trails connecting Crowhasset Park and Elm Creek Park. It will also connect to the future Diamond Lake Regional Trail as planned by Three Rivers. We are looking to program and partner with outside partners to conduct educational bow hunts catered toward youth or persons with special needs. Foraging for wild edibles would be available, and of course field trips for nearby schools. There's several schools just within a few mile radius of this property. In terms of the project budget and the process, again, acquisition of this property would be the first step. Going through the survey process, the purchase agreement. The Stieg family, again, has committed to donating 2 acres to help preserve this property. City staff and consulting costs in terms of staffing costs, legal costs, those are all being committed to by the city. A natural resource assessment will be completed. Restoration activities would include removal of buckthorn, any other invasive species to help create a baseline for future management of the forest, as well as restoring that 5-acre strip of tilled property. Long-term, the Minnesota Land Trust will make annual assessments to ensure the protection of and health of the habitat into perpetuity. So really, the final thing that I would say, the reason for the ask, these grant funds, again, will protect this area permanently from those development pressures that I mentioned that, again, are they've been consistent in the city of Rogers and in this southern area of the city up to this point, especially post-recession. Have been hundreds and hundreds of housing units built on that south end of Rogers, and that interchange is going to just speed that up. This is really a point in time where we need to kind of strike while the iron is hot and complete this before the development pressures encroach to the point where we can't go backward. Rogers is a city of 13,000 people. We have limited resources, limited funds with which to accomplish these types of projects. But the city has, as the local government unit, the city has committed, and so is Hennepin County. You'll find in the application a letter of support from Hennepin County. The city and Hennepin County have committed to removing this property from its development inventory and to really foregoing those tax revenues to help make that happen. So with that, I would open that up for questions for myself, for John, for the property owner.
Any questions? Sure, Jamie.
Jamie Becker-Finn. I just wanted to compliment your proposal. This, you know, we go through this giant binder, and this was one of the proposals. I don't know, I can't tell you exactly why, but the way it was described, I really could picture it in my head. And I think that that isn't always true when we look at these proposals, and so it was really helpful for me in kind of getting my head around what you were trying to do. I don't know, it was just kind of the descriptions of the plants, and yeah, the design and scope of work section was really well done, and this was one that I like distinctly remember after having gone through everything. So whoever did your application, good job, because I could totally picture it. And I also just want to say too, I think I know when I look at the different maps and I see the density of housing that's in proximity, I actually see that as a good thing about the project, because it means that the Minnesotans who are paying the sales tax, that more of those folks are going to be able to access the good thing that you're doing. So just wanted to compliment on you on that, and I guess other proposers, if you want to look at that one as a good example of a description of a project, it was really helpful in making decisions.
Thank you. Staff would always give credit to the mayor and city council for these types of things. In this case, I would just say that that we had a lot of really passionate people putting that together. I was a little remiss at the beginning. I should have pointed out that in that application there is a great sort of 2-page summary on page 14, 15 of that I believe you had a copy of in front of you. So that's a good place to just look at for those overall details. But thank you.
Ron, did you have a comment, question?
I just wanted to say to Mr. Stieg that I appreciate your vision, and I think you're taking a little hit too on this. So bless you for that. That chunk of woods will be there a long, long time when you and I are gone, but your vision is to be respected. Thank you.
Scott?
I wanted to echo what the two previous speakers, Scott Dibble, the two previous speakers said, and it's exciting to see the Stiegs here. If they came ready to take the floor and articulate any, vision they have. I mean, this farm has been in your property. I mean, property has been in your hands since previous generations. You want to leave a legacy to future generations, which is to be commended. I'd love to hear from you, and really thank you for being here today.
We could have sold this land some years ago, but there's something about trees and the land, and my grandparents coming from Germany to be there and to nibble away at the sides of the woods. Of course, this was all woods. And so this is one of the few remaining, and we have another woods on the farm, and we have a couple trees standing out in the field that any good farmer would have knocked down a long time ago. But so besides these signature trees, this would be very, very hard to see bulldozers and saws and stuff like that and grinding things up when it can be preserved in the honor of my grandparents and parents. Thank you.
We're glad you're not any old farmer who cut those trees down. Mark, did you have something, and then we'll move on?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, members, Mark Holston. Yeah, to echo some of the comments, I recognize this project and what it means to the community. I live in my neighborhood, we have something that was similar to this. And I recognize how important it is to the community and the volume of access that it provides. So when I look at the map, like Representative Becker talked about, I see that encroachment up on it, and I recognize if this type of work doesn't happen, it's not going to happen, and people won't have that opportunity to access it. But I have to also be honest, when I sit here as a member of the council and look at what we're trying to do, this project represents a tremendous amount of conflict for me. Because I understand what it is. I understand what it's going to become, and it's basically a park, is what it's going to be. And it's going to have huge amounts of disturbance, which is going to minimize its wildlife opportunity. And when I look at all the other projects coming in, that's going to provide quality habitat that sustains wildlife. Where is that tension? This is part of the tension this council has to deal with on a yearly basis. And it's not that I don't like it. I do. I see its value. I utilize that value all the time in my community. But my community did it themselves. They didn't come to the council and ask for it. And that's a side point, but it's, for me, I just want the members to understand that I struggle with these. Not because I don't see their value. It's, are we the right source of revenue for these parklands in communities?
Sure. Councilmember, yes, I very much understand the goals of the council and the needs to deliver what the intent of the program is. I would just point out one quick thing, and then I'll hand it off to John here for the second part of this answer. But so the City of Rogers has actually undertaken this type of project in the past. The City of Rogers and the township prior to annexation, we actually did accomplish a similar type of project on the north end of Rogers with an area called Henry's Woods, which is how many acres, John?
40 acres when Cabela's added.
So 40 to 60 acres, depending on how you look at that. That one does have a slightly a little bit more in terms of access, in terms of trails going through it. But I can let John talk just a bit about how this project would be a little bit different from that and less invasive to that point in terms of the community. So it's some activity there, ability to access the property, but not treating this the same way that we may have treated those others. But yes, we have accomplished it, these types of things on our own in the past without outside dollars. This one's just a little bit beyond our reach, but I can let John talk about this area in particular.
We understand the grant application and your goals, and valid point. I think the one thing we'd bring to the table is that we have in our master park plan not identified this as any part of our park, and we look to the region to try and help us with that, because we have two crossroads of regional trails hitting this site, one from Corcoran to the south, and then as mentioned, the Rush Creek, the county ditch section that drained Rush Creek previously is part of our commitment to restore this and make this more of a larger piece that has more stormwater and water quality impacts that we're looking at globally on this site. But this is the last piece, and we were looking for partnerships in that, and that was our presentation. So we understand, and I think if you have an opportunity to look at Henry's Woods, it really is a jewel in the middle of the community, but it has not been intensified. In fact, we don't have any motorized vehicles. We used horses when we did the removal of that, and continue to try and do that stewardship. And Minnesota Land Trust comes through each year, and that's who our other partner would be on this project. So thank you.
Thank you very much. For no more than 15 seconds, because we got to move on.
The Lorax might speak for the trees, but I'm going to speak for the smallest types of wildlife, and even a very small parcel in a front yard can have impacts for our pollinators and our birds. So I just want to remind us of that. I know it's easy to think of the turkey that's right over here that somebody could shoot with a bow if they wanted to, but just want to make that point.
All right. Thank you very much. We
Thank you, and
appreciate
just remember us as
coming
the second group of turkeys to visit the site today. So thank you very much.
Next on our list is, sorry. No more Loraxes, okay? WA01, Accelerating the Waterfowl Production Area Program, Phase 14. Go ahead.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and council members. My name is Will Clayton. I'm a regional representative with Pheasants Forever, and I'm here on short notice as my colleague Aaron Sanquist is sick. And I realize I'm here today to request funding, but the first thing I'd like to request is for those of you that know Aaron to keep him and his family at the top of mind. Today I'm representing Pheasants Forever, our members, our chapters, all of which highly value the acceleration of permanent wildlife habitat all across the pheasant range of Minnesota. Along with me today is Scott Gloop, Fish and Wildlife Project leader out of Litchfield, and we are tasked with presenting the Accelerating Waterfowl Production Area, Phase 14. I'm going to be brief and to the point for two reasons. This partnership program has been in existence since the start of the Legacy Amendment, and I'll be honest, this isn't something I normally do. In fact, this is the first time I've actually had to study our project proposal. What I do have is experience with the results of these funds. I'm lucky enough to complete a handful of acquisitions each year. I've sat at kitchen tables and coffee shops with families overjoyed that they're able to leave a legacy and create high-quality wildlife habitat open to the public. I keep in touch with many of these individuals today. I've helped dedicate tracts in memory of individuals that have given much of their life to volunteer conservation. I've seen our PF chapters light up when they realize all those prime rib dinners were worth it, and we're able to leverage their local dollar to create more access and habitat in their local community. And of course, I've seen the benefit personally of all these wildlife complexes we're building on, and I'm excited to share these areas with my new puppy Mojo and hopefully introduce a new hunter or two. Our goal is simple. We are working to accelerate fee title protection of waterfowl production areas. The projects you see in this proposal were developed in partnership with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service using sound science and conservation planning. Together with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and our 73 chapters, we are happy to be bringing in over $8 million in non-state match to this proposal. So I believe you all got a handout that we provided today. I want to go over that really quickly with you. I'm going to work on the graph side of this. All of the work highlighted in blue is complete and the final reports are approved. And as you can see, an item worth noting is we beat our acre goals each year. The two items highlighted in peach, the acquisition portion is complete and the balance is primarily for restoration. And what we've got left in the two green sections, acquisition work is still ongoing and on track to meet or exceed stated goals. We're proud of this partnership. And as you can see from the table in front of you and in this handout, we've delivered results. We are completing our work on time and routinely exceeding our leverage and our acre goals. We are among the most efficient and effective at delivering outdoor heritage funds to the places and projects that need it the most. And on behalf of this partnership, the wildlife that benefit, and all those prime rib dinners, I want to thank you for allowing us to help deliver the council's vision. I'm going to hand it over to Scott.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, council members. I believe most of you know me or have heard from me, so it's good to be here again. Driving here this morning, I was reflecting. I started my first job with Fish and Wildlife Service in 1983, so that dates me a little bit. And so I've worked in 5 different states, 7 different stations, and several long-term details in our regional office in Minneapolis. So been around a little while. And when you get to my age, I think most people start thinking about what legacy they've left. And, you know, I've done a lot of different things in my career. I've seen a lot of policies, administrations, priorities come and go. But when I look back, by far, the most important thing that I've been involved in is acquisition of public lands and easements and protection of that that wildlife habitat in perpetuity. Now, in your handout, you got to see those 2 tracks that are highlighted there adjacent to our office just south of Litchfield. So we have a 220-acre WPA that's been there for several decades, and recently we added those 2 tracks through this program. And I just want to share that the track to the north on that map, a couple years ago, the landowner came in, and he's lived there all his life, farmer, and I'd been there for 16 years, and I'd never met the man. And he came in my office, and he said, after we chatted a while, he said, Scott, you know, I never really paid much attention to what this place was over here until I got grandkids. And you probably don't know it, but I've been coming over here in evenings and some weekends with my grandkids and walking on your boardwalk and looking at the birds on the wetland. And I particularly like the pollinator plot and all the flowers that you've got planted. And he said, I'm going to be selling my land to the north, and I think I'd like to see that managed this way. So, you know, those are the kind of things that oftentimes you don't hear about. As I look back at my career, you know, I was gung-ho on wildlife, 100% wildlife when I started, but I'm pretty well focused a lot on the people aspect now of what I do and how that makes differences in the future. So those things are important. I think it's important for you to hear. I know you get to hear that some, but that's just kind of some changes over my career and that I've seen. And we get to be fortunate enough to work with a lot of landowners that come in with similar stories as that. Some other things that are exciting, not only is that a nice addition to our headquarters WPA, but we don't focus on doing a lot of public use type events on wetland management districts in general. We're more of a habitat focused station versus like Minnesota Valley National Wildlife Refuge here that has a strong focus on visitor services. But we do some wonderful events, and an example, and we'll expand that now to this the track to the north, is for the last 5, 6, 7 years, I can't remember how long we've been doing a project with the Litchfield 5th grade students, and they've been coming out each year and spending a day out on one of our units planting pollinator seeds and plants, and we have different partners there, and we put together a day. And we didn't get to do that in 2020, but we did pull it off this spring in 2021. And so it's just another example of each year now, all the 5th graders in Litchfield get to come out and spend a day in the field. It's nice to have a place like this that's only 2.5 miles from their school. School districts have budgets also to consider in these events. So just wanted to share those with you, and I guess I'll open it up to if there's any questions.
Questions? Apparently you said it all. Thank you very much. We appreciate. Oh, I'm sorry, Jamie. I didn't mean to ignore you.
That's all right. Thank you, Jamie Swenson. The proposals that you bring forward have always been requesting a lot more than what's allocated each year. Can you speak, I know you both have on-the-ground experience, can you speak to the need and how you actually go about picking the projects and the priorities based on the smaller amount that gets allocated?
All right. I think I'm on. There we are. Mr. Chair and Council, I wasn't a part of putting this proposal together, as I mentioned. However, my contact information is published to 135,000 Pheasants Forever and Quail Forever members, 23,000 of which are in Minnesota. I get a lot of phone calls, often weekly, with families, like I mentioned earlier, that want to leave a legacy. And if their property fits the priorities we mentioned and talked about, we can certainly add them to the list. This number here and the proposals in the past show, in my mind, a demand for this kind of work that we're doing. And I realize it's lofty, but we didn't just come up with this, certainly. Scott, I don't know if you want to touch on some of the criteria we use to score out these projects, but it's not just every parcel that comes my way. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, council members, well, these are waterfowl production areas, so wetlands are critical. Now, in our landscape in southwest Minnesota, you know, most of you probably know 90 to 95% of the prairie potholes have been drained. So when we evaluate these areas, one of our big focuses are wetland-dependent species duck production. So we have to have the presence or the potential of restorable wetlands on these. And the Fish and Wildlife Service, again, this is one of those things I've seen so many times in my career. We go through these prioritization modeling, and as we learn more about biology and technology, it seems like every 3, 4, 5 years, okay, we need to reevaluate the model that we use to evaluate these tracks, and we recently just did that again and came up with we call it a hierarchical type of model now that we use to evaluate properties in terms of their potential to accomplish the goals as a waterfowl production area. So we try to keep up to speed with that. Boy, have I seen a change in my years, you know. It used to be pretty simple. Now with all the information, science, technology we have, it's amazing what we can do to look at the potential of these tracks, assuming we have them purchased and get them restored the way we'd like.
Any other questions that I've missed? Great, thank you for your work. Appreciate you coming in today. Next is WA2, Wetland Habitat Protection and Restoration Program, Phase 7.
Good morning. You hear me okay? Chairman Hartwell, council members, thank you for the opportunity to be able to present today. I'm Bev Rinke, Wetlands Program Manager for the Minnesota Land Trust. With me is Amelia Kienow, Restoration Project Coordinator for the Land Trust, and Sheldon Meyerton, Partners for Fish and Wildlife Program State Coordinator. The Wetland Habitat Protection and Restoration Program is centered within the prairie pothole region of west central Minnesota, where wetlands, shallow lakes, and associated upland habitat provide an essential backbone to North America's waterfowl population. These wetlands are important for a large number of other native species, with more than 50% of Minnesota's species in greatest conservation need using wetlands at some point during their life cycle. Plans developed to protect Minnesota's wildlife cite the protection and restoration of the state's remaining wetlands as one of the top priorities to the state's conservation goals. To date, the Minnesota Land Trust has been a recipient of 6 OHF grants focused on the protection of these wetland resources. Our program uses a competitive, market-based approach to conservation easements, targets high-quality areas with an emphasis on building habitat complexes, and brings restoration and enhancement into the equation through a partnership with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. This is truly a public and private partnership, funding provided by the state of Minnesota, conservation easements procured and restored by MLT and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife, and active participation of private landowners to protect and restore their resources. In total, across wetlands grants 1 through 3, we have significantly exceeded our land protection and leverage goals. To date, we have protected 3,656 acres of important habitat, achieving 146% of our proposed goal. Over 30 miles of shoreline have been protected through these 3 grants. In addition, our restoration and enhancement work is now 3 years old and is resulting in 3,535 acres of restored habitat. Across our respective grants to date, and due to the significant landowner donation of easement value, which is at $12 million and counting, we are acquiring easements at an average of $1,050 per acre. We're extremely efficient with the resources allocated to us. Through this Phase 7 proposal, the Minnesota Land Trust will protect 2,600 acres of wetland and associated upland habitat and restore and enhance another 1,597 acres on lands protected in easement. We plan on continuing with our focus on protection of private lands. Collaboration with local SWCDs and partners such as Fish and Wildlife have greatly assisted in the expansion of our program. Additionally, landowners who have easements on their property and are working on restoration are spreading the word about habitat protection and their legacy, a conservation conversation that is growing across the landscape. Over 30 landowners submitted applications through our RFP this spring, and the inquiries and applications continue to come in. With the projects that are currently ongoing, these applications will complete Wetlands 4 and Wetlands 5 and establish a list of high-quality projects for Wetlands 6, which just came online July 1st. Our request in this round for easement protection is based on the level of interest that we're seeing from landowners and the very high quality of applications that we're receiving. I'm going to hand it over now to Emmy and Sheldon to discuss the restoration and enhancement portions of this proposal.
All right. So again, my name is Amelia Kino, and I'm the Restoration Project Coordinator with the Minnesota Land Trust. Restoration and enhancement deliverables have been part of the wetlands program for the last 5 proposals, phases 3 through 7. To date, we have initiated activities for restoration and enhancement on 3,433 acres, or more than 90% of our accomplishment plan objectives for all grants. The remaining 10% are identified and in the planning and scoping stages of project development. We are on pace to meet and exceed deliverables on all fronts. As in the past, the restoration and enhancement portion of this proposal will be completed through MLT's partnership with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service Partners for Fish and Wildlife Program. In this proposal, we have included 18 Fish and Wildlife Service easements covering in total 1,597 acres. Several of the easement tracts identified have both a wetland and a prairie restoration component, and 7 of the tracts protect native prairie remnants. The priority in these restorations will be restoring the hydrology of drained wetland basins, as well as the restoration or enhancement of diverse native prairie and upland areas, these together providing critical wildlife habitat. The Land Trust and the Fish and Wildlife Service have a strong and growing partnership in getting these goals accomplished, with each organization complementing the other's strengths. In this partnership, the Fish and Wildlife Service private lands biologists utilize their extensive local knowledge and experience to develop and implement site-specific restoration plans while utilizing long-standing relationships with local contractors and the landowner to steer the on-the-ground work. The Land Trust provides experience with contracting and grant management to guide the projects to completion. In combining our efforts in this way, both organizations can accomplish more restoration acres than we would be able to alone, accelerating habitat restoration and enhancement on the prairie pothole landscape. I will now hand it over to Sheldon to talk more about Fish and Wildlife Service.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman and council members. Again, my name is Sheldon Meyerton. I'm the state coordinator with the Services Partners for Fish and Wildlife program. And for those of you that may not be aware, our program has been restoring wildlife habitat on private lands across the state for almost 35 years. And we're very proud of the fact that Partners for Fish and Wildlife was developed right here in Minnesota and is now active in all 50 states. Our program focuses primarily on wetlands and prairie habitat in the state, And we average over 5,000 acres of restoration enhancement projects each year. Our partnership with Minnesota Land Trust has been invaluable to accelerate the habitat restoration portion of the proposal on both Minnesota Land Trust and Fish and Wildlife Service easements, and helps address the backlog of easement tracts in need of restoration. We continue to have strong landowner interest in both easement acquisitions and habitat restoration. And almost all of the Fish and Wildlife Service easements are working lands easements that have a haying or grazing option to assist in the long-term management of the properties. And with that, thank you very much, and we're ready for questions.
Any questions? I don't think I missed anyone. You must have answered our questions. Thank you very much. Appreciate you coming in today. Next is WA03, Wildlife Shoreline Protection Phase 8.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members. My name is Bill Penning. I'm the Conservation Programs Consultant with the Board of Water and Soil Resources, and I'm here today to talk about the Wild Rice Shoreland Protection Program Phase 8. But before I get into that, I understand that there's been some discussion about whether RIM is a clean water program or a habitat program or just what the heck is RIM. As you can see over the last couple of days, there's been a number of proposals that include RIM, which are habitat focused, but we also do clean water type work too. And so I thought that I would just actually pull up the statute. 103F505 gives the purpose and policy of the RIM program. And I'm just going to read a couple sentences for you. The purpose is to restore certain marginal agricultural land and protect environmentally sensitive areas to enhance soil and water quality, minimize damage to flood-prone areas, sequester carbon, and support native plant, fish, and wildlife habitats. It is state policy to encourage the restoration of wetlands and riparian lands and promote the retirement of marginal, highly erodible land, particularly land adjacent to public waters, drainage systems, wetlands, and locally designated priority waters. In a different section in statute, we also have authorization for the ACUB program. So you can see that the RIM program has a wide scope of what we do. And we work with Outdoor Heritage Fund dollars, bonding dollars, and Clean Water Fund dollars as well. So diving into the Phase 8 of the Wild Rice Shoreline Protection Program, we're here today to ask the Council for $2 million to secure approximately 1,150 acres and 6.5 miles of shoreline habitat into perpetual RIM easements. Minnesota historically harbored more acres of natural wild rice than any other state. The range of wild rice in the United States at one point, in addition to Minnesota, the entire state of Minnesota extended into Iowa, Wisconsin, Michigan, and the edge of the Dakotas. Those other states, for all practical purposes, have entirely lost their wild rice resources, and we've lost ours throughout the southern portion of the state as well. So essentially, what we have left is ground zero for protecting wild rice on a landscape level. So we see this as a very important project. Wild rice provides both spring and fall staging areas for waterfowl, particularly ringneck ducks. And much of the annual production in the United States of ringdecks occurs in Minnesota, the Dakotas, Wisconsin, and the UP. And Minnesota is a major fall staging area for ringneck ducks. Wild rice provides critical high-energy food and prepares the birds in the spring for reproduction and in the fall for migration to wintering grounds. In addition to ringneck ducks, 17 species of special concern, such as bitterns, rails, grebes, and black terns, use wild rice beds as feeding and nesting areas. We have a real threat here as less developable land remains on the more desirable recreational lakes. Shallow lakes are increasingly targeted for shoreland development. Not only does this increase disturbance and nutrient loading, but it also creates potential conflict as cabin owners insist on stable and deeper water levels, which is not conducive to wild rice production. These threats and others were documented in the DNR's wild rice study that they published back in 2008, and it's quite an extensive study. One of the issues that we have with wild rice is that there's sort of a double risk to it. In the spring and early summer, when the rice is grass, when it comes up and it's laying on the water, it's particularly at risk at that time for the shoots being uprooted. And sometimes flooding can cause that. You know, there's not a lot we can do about that, but running boats through there and those sorts of things will cause problems too. So disturbance in the spring can seriously impact that year's production of wild rice. Extensive disturbance in the fall can also disturb the staging areas and waterfowl's ability to fatten up and get ready for fall migration. Wild rice is culturally, economically, and ecologically important food resource for both people as well as wildlife. Native Americans have a long and intimate relationship with wild rice, and it's important both spiritually and economically. Much of our work is done within the 1837 and 1854 treaty areas, where signatory bands retain the rights to rice. It's a little more complicated than that, but I'll leave it at that. So we have done some coordination with the bands on this, particularly when the program was first developed, and that predates me. Dan Stewart has now retired 2 days ago, so I will be the project manager for wild rice, so I'm coming in a little cold here. But we have done some previous coordination with the bands on it, and we've received their support. In fact, I believe that Fond du Lac actually submitted a letter of support for phase 1. I probably don't need to remind you of this, but I will anyways. Protecting wild rice resources are LSOHC section priorities for both the northern forest and the forest prairie transition, which is where this project occurs. Doing rim wild rice easements is cost effective. Our cost is about $1,000 an acre, which is, you know, cheap for lakeshore property. And if you've heard Dan Stewart's talk about this before, it's also much, much less expensive to protect the resource while it's still in good shape than it is to try to reassemble the resource once it's been significantly degraded. So it's the old ounce of prevention is better than a pound of cure. Our rim easements are habitat focused, although they certainly accomplish water quality benefits. And you know, what we're doing is we're preventing development and preserving natural habitat along lakeshore and rivers throughout wild rice lakes, watersheds, throughout the watersheds. And with all rim, we are perpetually protecting the resource while private ownership continues. We do have an extensive partnership and collaboration. We work with the 14 soil and water conservation districts, with the DNR Shallow Lakes program, with area wildlife managers and fisheries managers, with county staff, and with Ducks Unlimited, and any other partners that would like to be involved. Quickly, outcomes from our prior phases. If you look at phases 1 through 6, we've completed 75 easements on 30 lakes. and 4 parcels have had DNR fee title acquisition completed and have public access. But this proposal this time does not include DNR acquisition. Sometimes we do, sometimes we don't. If you're looking at your one-page handout, I have a minor update to it. We have recorded 4,979 acres of easements to date. That's a little bigger number than it was before. And overall, for RIM, we've exceeded our acreage goals by 36%. We protected over 25 miles of high-priority wild rice shorelines, provided public access to 400 additional acres, and protected forest lands from development and fragmentation, keeping habitat corridors intact. So overall, the benefits to Minnesotans include protecting wildlife habitat that supports healthy populations, improves hunting and fishing by protecting wildlife complexes, and safeguards important wildlife rice resources. A tongue twister. With that, I'll stand for questions.
Any questions? Jamie.
Jamie Becker-Finn, and I'm not sure if what you meant by a deep connection to wild rice meant that I'm sitting here with wild rice in my shoes, because these were the shoes I was wearing to go ricing last weekend, but just wanted to hit, we talk about wild rice, obviously, and all these other things that are sort of, technically outside of the scope of, necessarily the goal of, when we think of what the goal is of hunting and fishing with the Outdoor Heritage Council. But I just wanted to speak to, the idea that when wild rice is flourishing, it's an indication that everything else in the ecosystem is doing really well. And I was actually talking to Councilmember Edmondson yesterday, trying to ID some of the birds that I saw when I was ricing last weekend. So, you know that things are going well for all of the animals, and I think especially for duck hunters know that it's incredibly important in that realm as well. So just, I think using RIM as a tool for this purpose is exactly what we should be doing with programs like RIM. So thank you.
Thank you. And I'll bet you saw lots of soras last weekend too.
That's what he helped me figure. They were like running on the lily pads.
Yep, and then they get up and they fly 10 feet and then they're down before you even get a look at them. Yep, soras are thick and heavy in there this time of year.
Other questions? Great, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Members, I'm going to interrupt our schedule a little. We had 2 representatives from Lake County who asked to make a public comment and didn't understand that it was at the end of the day, and they've driven all the way down. So I'm going to let them make their public comments now so they can drive back and not spend the whole day here, if that's all right with everyone. We appreciate you coming down to share your thoughts with us, whatever they are.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, for taking the time to put us in kind of ahead of schedule. You will find that we did distribute, or comments were distributed to you that I will be reading today. So, Mr. Chair and board members, good morning, and thank you for all the work that you do on behalf of the residents of Minnesota. My name is Rich Svay. I'm chair of the Lake County Board of Commissioners, and with me today is County Administrator Matthew Huddleston. I prepared these remarks, as I said, and I wish to share those with the council in opposition to the request before you identified as FA01, and I'll try to keep these comments brief. And first, allow me to thank the Friends of the Boundary Waters for contacting Lake County prior to submitting the application for funding, as well as informing us of their intentions. And we do appreciate their open dialogue. I wish to emphasize to this council that Lake County does not have any concerns if the Friends of the Boundary Waters acquires the property identified in this application. However, we do oppose the use of public funds, taxpayer dollars, to purchase or aid in a procurement of this property. As I'm sure you are aware, Lake County is blessed with a plethora of public lands, including the BWCA, the Superior National Forest, the Finland Forest, state parks, and of course Lake County tax forfeited lands. That public land makes up 83% of the 1.3 million acres that make up Lake County, leaving only 17% of the land base in private ownership. Or another way to look at that breakdown, of that 1.3 million acres, there are only 221,000 acres that are in private ownership. So please note that these numbers are not exact, but they are a general and accepted representation. This leaves a small amount of private land for development for our main tax base. As I'm sure you can imagine, Lake County pays close attention to potential projects that would effectively remove any properties from the tax rolls or further prevent properties from being developed. 3 main points were brought up in the application, and they are protection of wildlife habitat, protection of shoreline, and preventing forest fragmentation. So I'd like to share our perspectives. Regarding protection of wildlife, we have a great diversity in public land management with the DNR and the U.S. Forest Service, and bringing forward initiatives to work to protect wildlife. Much of that management or protection is in concert with private entities, such as the Minnesota Deer Hunters and Ducks Unlimited, many of which you have interacted with through the Outdoor Heritage Council. In fact, the land in the proposal is adjacent to or near to the BWCA, which in itself in whole is comprised of more than 1 million acres of permanently protected wildlife habitat. So allow me again to highlight that 83% of Lake County property is in public ownership and afforded protection. Lake County has not identified anything unique about the parcels discussed today that would necessitate protection suggested in this application. Protection of shoreline. There are 26,000 miles of shoreline in Lake County. Nearly 1,800 miles of that shoreline is within the BWCA. Much of the shoreline outside of the wilderness is on public land. 2 parcels in this application are on Snowbank Lake, and together equal 96 acres. The 4,600 acre lake's shoreline is over 90% publicly owned, and a large portion of that is within the BWCA. Also mentioned was the South Koshaway River parcels. In this application are adjacent to a mix of private and public lands. These parcels represent prime real estate in an area of Lake County that has limited opportunities for growth. Lake County wishes to underscore that the vast majority of these shorelines are already protected. The applicant has not provided any proof that development of these riparian parcels would be detrimental to the environment, surrounding area, or to the BWCA. And lastly, they brought up fragmentation of forests. Over the years, Lake County has worked with other public land agencies and private entities to consolidate land ownership where it makes sense. An example of this is the Clare Nelson Memorial Forest. Lake County purchased 6,600 acres of land in 2005 for $2.2 million to aid with moose habitat protection, to consolidate a large tract of land, and to allow for better forest management, and also to help us sustain jobs in the logging industry. Please note all of the land in this proposal before you are adjacent to public land, and therefore would not have enough impact to warrant the purchase for the purpose of diminishing forest fragmentation in Lake County. So in summary, Lake County has and will support case-specific projects if there's a unique feature or special circumstance. We are open to that support. Lake County has many examples of this support over the years, including projects like the Clare Nelson I just mentioned. Lake County strives to maintain its existing tax base and the potential to enhance this tax base through county permitted and approved development. Lake County is very sensitive to projects like the one before you, and the purpose to deny future homes, cabins, and businesses. We have limited private land near the BWCA, and we believe it is important to allow for development in this land in a scrutinized and responsible manner. Further, Lake County is apprehensive should this proposal be funded. Would these lands remain in private ownership in perpetuity? Is this an attempt to create a buffer to the wilderness? And during the hearing, the applicant actually mentioned that they were making their first step into protecting the boundary waters through these purchases or acquisitions. Lastly, we wish to reiterate to the council the fact that Lake County has a finite amount of developable property within our borders. And we do not believe that the Friends of the Boundary Waters request demonstrates a clear analysis to necessitate elevating these parcels to add protections, nor do we believe that their appeal rises to the urgency or need for taxpayer dollars. Therefore, we suggest the funding request be denied. Mr. Chair, board members, we appreciate the opportunity to comment on this proposal. Lake County is uniquely, and I stress uniquely, aware of the sensitivity of land issues near the BWCA, as I'm positive this council also is. We are concerned that projects that aim to restrict development using taxpayer dollars outside of some unique or threatened species or attribute will create negative consequences in the future. We respectfully request that you take our comments into consideration when finalizing your recommendations to the legislature for approval. Lake County certainly appreciates the funding that has been approved in our county and surrounding area for forest and habitat improvements. We will continue to work with agencies, nonprofit organizations, and other interested landowners to continue to make our land and forests better for generations to come. Thank you for hearing and considering our concerns. Mr. Chair, we are happy to address any questions.
All right. We don't typically do many questions with public comments, but we appreciate you coming down and making the effort to share your thoughts with us. And wish you a good trip back.
All right. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Members, we'll take a break until 10:25. We're running right on schedule.